Welcome to part 2 of my VBA bringing a window or application to the forefront. In part 1, if you haven't already seen it, I'll provide a link below. We covered the approach of using the set foreground window API. So as long as we could capture and supply the Windows handle of the application we were automating or we wanted to bring to the forefront, we could simply use the set foreground window API. However, as we learned, it isn't always easy or possible to capture the handle. And that's what part 2 is going to be about, is how do we approach those types of applications? How can we manage to bring those to the forefront anyway? So let's dive in. Well, I've written an article about this, obviously, and what it is the next approach, if we don't have a handle, is hopefully we can, through automation or some other technique, have the title of the window. And if we have the title or a part of the title, then we can search for it. We can iterate through the windows, find the one that matches that title that we're looking for, and by doing so, find its handle and bring it to the foreground. I'm going to show you 2 approaches to achieving this. The first one, which is using APIs, I came across a long time ago. I believe it was created or provided to us on Wayne Phillips's website. The code I'm going to give you is basically his code. I've just adapted it for 64-bit as well, and I changed variable names and things like that just to adapt it to my coding style. But I take no credit whatsoever for this solution. And then we're going to later see a second approach that I've discovered by doing all the UI automation code that I've been showing you guys and putting on my website recently. And I tend to prefer this solution just because there's no more APIs involved. So there's no more 32-bit, 64-bit considerations and things like that. But anyway, at the end of the day, the choice will be yours. But I'm going to show you 2 different approaches, how we can tackle situations like PowerPoint, for instance. So if we look at the API approach, and I'll just click on the link here just to bring up the original page. From Everything Access, like I said, Wayne Phillips, anything he provides is rock solid and dependable. It's a great approach. You can look at his comments, the way he built it up and everything. It's a good article. He covers the subject well. I'm just going to copy my version of it. And we'll take a quick glance at what it is exactly. But if we just open up the previous database, we're going to go into the VBA, the VBA editor. We'll create a new module just to keep things clean. Mod find window, by title. And we'll call it the API approach. And if you put it in here, let's just take a glance at it quickly. As always, save it. Make sure it compiles. There's no errors. As you can see, there are none. What we have here is we have compiler directive here that's if we're dealing with 64-bit, we use these declarations. Otherwise, i.e. if we're in 32-bit, then it's going to use these declarations. That's what that does. And because of that consideration, what you end up finding out is if we look at an example here of the set foreground API. Well, if you look here, it's expecting the handle to be a long PTR. Yet, if you're in 32-bit, it's expecting the handle to be a long. And that's why you're going to see in different locations now, I have to use that same directive, compiler directive, to make sure it understands in 64-bit, it's a long PTR, but in 32-bit, it's just long. Same thing with the function. In 64-bit, it has to be long PTR, but in 32, it's a long. So that's why you're seeing these compiler directives all over the place. It's to differentiate between 32-bit and 64 bits, and it works universally. And then if you look at his code, it's very, very simple. This is the guy that we're going to be using, find window by title, and you supply it to, and you'll see I've changed his function. This is one of the things that changed. He originally was just doing a find by the title to find the handle and returning it. I've added an option of setting the focus, and I integrated the set foreground window directly into this function. It made more sense to me than having to call it separately every single time. And now I have a single function that does it all for me. And basically he comes here, he sets this parameter to what you're searching for, and then he uses the enum window. So it's going to loop through and it's going to run the enum window procedure that he created later. We'll look at it in 2 seconds. And that's going to build up a parameter if it finds a result and return it back to us, so then we can later use it, which the parameter that it returns, as you can see, will be the handle of the window it found, if it finds one. If it doesn't find one, it returns a 0. And because of that, then you're able to then check, did it find something different than 0? If it did, and you said set focus on it, then it runs the set foreground window API to bring it to the forefront. The enum is really straightforward here that he uses. He's going to go through window by window, and he's going to get the title of each window that it's currently iterating through, and it's going to then compare the window title to the search parameter that you've specified, what you're searching for. If it finds a match, then it sets the parameter that it's going to return, the handle, to the handle of the window that it's currently on. Otherwise, it's going to keep iterating over and over and over. And that's what he does here, is if he finds a match, he sets the enum window proc to 0, which tells it to stop iterating through the windows because it's found its match. It has a little helper function here, trim null, to trim off null characters at the end of the string. It's just a helper function. But basically here, he comes here, it's going to iterate through all the windows one by one. If it finds a match, it returns the handle. So then we can use our set foreground window. So basically, it's just instead of being able to set directly on the handle, we have to now iterate through the top level windows. You'll see here, you can do, I've added a couple examples of using it. The key to using any of these approaches using by title is to make sure that this title you specify to search for is unique enough that it will bind to a unique entry. For instance, think of someone that has multiple instances of Word open and you're searching for Word. If you just search the word Word, well, you don't know which of those documents it's going to pull. You don't know what order it's going to iterate through the window, so you don't know which window, which Word instance it's actually going to bind to. And that's where, when I use this, I always try to get the caption of the window. So enough blah blah, let's actually show it in work so you can see what I'm talking about. So as a first example, let's look at the case of PowerPoint where we can't get the handle. So it's very simple. I'm just going to copy the example from the blog. And if I put it here, it's the same scenario as the ones I presented in part 1 for Excel and Word. We're going to try to bind to an instance of PowerPoint. If one doesn't exist, we create it. And then I start a blank presentation, just so we have a full instance of PowerPoint to work with. And the magic all happens in the exact same 3 lines, but this time, instead of using the set foreground window, we're using our find window by title function that then calls all the APIs and enumerates through the windows and finds what we're looking for. Now, let's look at the first case as it is right now. I'm going to search for the PowerPoint caption, and then I add to it -PowerPoint. Well, let's see what happens. If we run it, as you can see, PowerPoint is not visible right now. We're in the VBA. But if we run that command, PowerPoint comes to the forefront. So let's just look for a second at what we've done. What is the PowerPoint caption? Well, PowerPoint caption in this case will return presentation 4. And then I added a suffix of -PowerPoint. Now, different versions, different editions of Office, that -PowerPoint isn't always there, or it might be in the front, or, there's different scenarios. So it's not necessarily 100% the way you want to code it. You want to make it more flexible. And that's why if you look in the code, my version of it, I added the wildcard, and I check if it's a literal match or if we want to use a like comparison. So we can actually use a wildcard if we want. but let me demonstrate if we don't. If we just say, I'm just searching for the caption, what happens? Well, if we run it, once again, PowerPoint is not in front. It's not in the forefront. We don't see it. If we run it as is, it's going to be doing a literal comparison. It will not find the instance of PowerPoint. So what we have to do is we have to add that wildcard. By adding the wildcard here at the very end, as you can see, now when we run it, it will be able to search and find that instance for whatever comes after, as long as we're binding to the unique caption. So that is the big difference here. If you put a wildcard, it will do a like comparison. If you don't have a wildcard, then it does a literal comparison. It has to be identical. Also note, you can put a wildcard at the beginning if you so need to. And if we run it, you'll see it brings it up equally. So that's basically PowerPoint in a nutshell. Let's do one more example with the find window title. Let's take one of our previous examples from part 1. Let's take the Excel, for instance. We'll bring it into our module for the API. And now, instead of using the set foreground, right? Let's comment that guy out. We want to use our find window by title. Okay. And for Excel, so if we come down to our Excel section and we put it in here. So what we need to do here is we need to change this to Excel in this case, because it is Excel point caption. That will work. And we'll have to also adapt the code just slightly to be for Excel. And we'll do this. Now we have the function, and it returns the handle. And it can be useful to return the handle in case we wanted to use other APIs. But in the same scenario, if it returns 0, it didn't work. If it returns a value, then you know it worked. And if we run this, it should work. And it brings Excel to the front. And we can do the same thing we did last time and test it. Okay. So Excel is not in the foreground, and if we do complete the command, it does bring it to the foreground. So it is working properly. So that, in a nutshell, is using Wayne Phillips enum window proc. You can use it equally in Word. And in Word, however, you're not going to use a caption. Let me put it here in the immediate window. You're going to use the active document name. Okay. Okay, that now brings us to our second possible solution, which is using UI automation. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to copy, paste this function into my VBA. So I'll create a new module. Okay, mod. So we just come here, we paste it in. And now, if you look here, it does require one reference. There's no way to do late binding. We have to have a reference. But if we add our reference to the UI automation client and compile, everything is glorious and fine. So we'll save it. And it works in a similar way as the API, but without any APIs. It comes here and it's going to find the desktop. So we're going to bind to the desktop, and then we're doing a find all. So we're finding all the top level windows. And then I'm going to iterate through the windows one by one looking for our title. It's as simple as that. And I did the same thing. if you have a literal comparison where they have to be identical, or you have a wildcard search, then it's a like comparison. And if it finds something, then it's going to set the focus on that window. It's going to bring it to the front. So very simple code, nothing complex there. So if we now go to pull out, let's say, our PowerPoint again, well, the code would look something like this. So let's just go below a few lines. I'll copy paste. It's on the website. And we're doing the exact same thing, except this time, instead of using the API approach, we're using the automation, UI automation approach, and we're using the PowerPoint caption again. And if we run it, you'll see that PowerPoint comes to the front. You can do the exact same thing for Excel. If we copy paste the code and we run it, Excel comes to the front. You can do the same thing for Word. And you'll see here, we're using Word active document name like I had mentioned previously. And if you run it, Word will come to the front. And that is as hard as it is to bring a window to the front if you don't have its handle. As long as you can identify its caption, its title, then you can still bring it to the front and ensure that it's visible to your users. It's very straightforward. You have two distinct approaches. You can go via APIs, or you can go by UI automation. The choice is yours. One has APIs and considerations for 32-bit, 64-bit. The other doesn't have the APIs and those considerations, but you do need the reference library. Both in my testing so far have also always worked very well. I've been asked in the past how I identify windows and I find out certain information about them. So I thought I'd just a little bonus. It's in the article at the very bottom. I provided a very simple function using UI automation. You could use the API approach equally. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you can see, it's very similar to our actual function that we're using to retrieve and set the focus, where I'm finding the desktop and then I'm doing a find all and I'm iterating through them. And then I just created a reporting mechanism, a debug print, and it's just going to give me here the handle, the name, and the class. And that's very simple. You just run it and you'll see, let's open up the immediate window a little bit more. But if I run it, it's going to give me a listing of what is currently top-level windows through my desktop. So the taskbar, my Visual Basic Editor, the Access instance that we're in right now, the VBA, which you can see is on Edge, so in my browser, and a Program Manager is running also. So this sometimes allows me to play around and understand and figure out things. In the article, for instance, I mentioned that we could take things further. Instead of just iterating through as we've done by title, we could also add a check for the class. Is it possible that you'd have two windows with similar titles, one in Word, let's say, and one in Excel? I guess anything's possible. I've never come across it personally. It's never been an issue. But if you wanted to really take things to the next level, we could add that. And by using a tool like this, you're able to extract the classes. So you'd be able to then find out, Excel, well, you use Excel main as a class if you wanted to be sure you were just searching Excel instances and Word was Opus app and things like that. So, but this is how basically I'm able to identify things sometimes. It's using a function like this one, a subroutine like this one that I can use to iterate things. And like here, I'm starting at the root element, but in reality, you can use this to break down any element. So I could be in Excel and tell me, give me all the top level windows within Excel. And I could use that to break down the ribbon or break down the navigation pane and Access and things like that. But this is the basic concept, is you give it a starting element and you tell it, break it down and give me the information about it. I'm pulling 3 properties. There are many other ones that you could pull as well. So I just hope that enlightens you a little bit. Well, that sums it up, guys. You now have 3 different approaches for bringing a window to the surface, to the forefront, and it's visible to your users. You can use that set foreground window API if you know the handle. And if you don't know the handle, well, then we can search for it by its title. And you can use either the API approach or the UI automation approach. The choice is yours. Both work. Hope this was informative and useful. Leave me a comment, guys. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe. If you're able to promote these videos in any way, please do so. Be greatly appreciated. And have a great day. We'll see you in the next video.